Hey again. So we're going to get the last part of congruent triangles here. So congruent triangles, we've talked about how transformations relate to congruency. We've looked at the congruency test and how and why they work. So this time we want to solve for variables after identifying congruent parts of triangles. And so in the first video that we dealt with here, we said a phrase of CPCTC. And we had looked at some triangles where we had measured every single part, and we saw that if triangles are going to be congruent, every single piece has to have a congruent match. And so we said that that meant corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. If you were doing proofs, that would be a really important thing. Okay, so what that does is it lets us decide, okay, we've got some triangles, we know a little bit. We looked at some where all right, if we need this and only this much, well, what that lets us know is that, well, these triangles are congruent. Let's give them a name. So since I have an angle, a set of angles, and a set of sides, and another set of angles, then I know that these triangles are congruent by the angle side angle test. Okay, all that I knew to start with was just the information that is marked. But now that I know they're congruent, well, these pieces got to match, these pieces got to match, and these angles got to match that I didn't know anything about, but now I do, because since the triangles are congruent, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Every piece has to have a congruent match. So now we could do a lot of other things with it, like set up equations and find values of missing pieces. And so first things first, let's write a congruency statement. And so all that means is that if we name this triangle ABC, well, I need to just put stuff in the right order, in a matching order, in an order that makes sense. And so angle A, well, I can see that it matches with angle D, so I've got to write D first. It's easier to deal with angles in this, but you can deal with it with sides too. But B, I gave it 2 marks, and I gave E 2 marks. So I'm going to put E next. And then C and F, I gave them both 1 mark. And so they match. They should go in the same spot. But also, I know that segment AB matches segment DE. Well, they're still there. They're in the same order. They're in the same spot. And so it matters. I could just look at only a congruency statement. And I could be able to look at that and decide just by looking at the congruency statement that angle B is congruent to angle E, simply because they're both in the same spot on the congruency statement. Okay, and so one of the things on your packet asks you to name the congruency test and to write a congruency statement. All right, so let's practice some more of that. Let's say that we were told that those 2 match and that C is the midpoint of segment AD. Okay, so, well, I need to find what information that tells me. It tells me these 2 pieces match, and hopefully we also see the shared side. Anytime there's a shared side, that side is the same between both triangles. So what congruency test is this? Here's a set of sides that I know matches. Here's another set of sides that I know has a match. And here's another set of sides that I know has a match. And so this is side, side, side. Well, then I need to be able to make a congruency statement. And so if one is already set for you, then you just need to match up with it. So let's say this was already set. So then we're just looking to see what matches with angle A. Well, A is the angle between the 1 mark and the 2 marks. And over here, I'm going to erase my stars so they're not bothering us. D is between the 1 mark and the 2 marks. So really it's kind of hardest on side, side, side. But we just compare the sides and where we're at between them. I'm going to write it down here. So A was first. It's between the 1 and the 2 mark. D has to go first. It's between the 1 and the 2 mark. B is next. It's up at the top. It's between the 1 and the 3 mark. Happens to be the same letter, and that's okay. They could be in a different spot too in another triangle, and that's okay as well. And then C is down here, and it's going to be the same also. That's a congruency statement. Let's do one more. All right, so let's see, we would need some information. Say that we were told that much is true. We got to know something else or we can't do this. Hopefully we see the vertical angle. And so what test says that these are congruent? So here's a set of angles, and here's a set of angles, and here's a side. The side is not between the angles that I know. Here's my angles. Side is not between it. It's over here. So this is angle, angle, side. All right. Well, now let's write a congruency statement. And so if I have triangle ABC is congruent to triangle, well, all right, here's A. It's got 1 mark on it. D over here has got 1 mark on it. B is next. I don't have a mark for it, so I should use E, the other one that I don't have a mark for. And then C, well, it happens to match itself. And again, that may not always be the case, but it would be a little different example to see that. Okay, so those are congruency statements. What we knew to start with is the thing that's marked. But now, and so this is really getting into what like an ACT question could be like, because they're not just going to ask you to do one thing. They're going to ask you to take something you know and make 2 or 3 different conclusions from it. We did not know anything about segment BC or segment CE. But now we do. Now we know, well, okay, it's across from the thing with 1 mark. And so is this. They've got to be congruent. Remember, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Everything has a match. We didn't know everything at first, but we knew enough to assume that they were congruent, and then we can match other things up. And so then if we were told that BC equals 3x minus 4 and that CE equals 2x plus 6, there's a number of questions that could be asked from this. First, let's just solve for x, okay? Since we know that we can, since we know that these 2 pieces are congruent to each other, we know that we can just set them equal. And so x equals 10. Great, but that may not be what the question's asking. The question might be asking, I'm going to give you the hardest one it might ask, okay? It might ask for the measure of BE. That would be my bet for an ACT question on this, okay? And my other bet would be that 10 would be an answer, because you stick these equal and you've done something good. You've done something right, and you've correctly solved for x, but that's not what it was asking, so be careful. So we want to know what BE is, the whole big segment. Well, I don't have a value for that, but BC, it's 3x minus 4, and now I know that x is 10. So BC is 3 times 10 minus 4. So BC is 26. Now, if I trust myself really well, then I can just go ahead and know that this is 26. But let's say I don't. Let's say that I just really want to make sure, even though if we're talking ACT, you've got a minute per question. So trust yourself and move on. But 2x plus 6, so 2 times 10 plus 6, so 26. Great. We verified with ourselves they were supposed to be congruent. They are congruent. So the measure of BE is the whole thing. And so we would add it together. And the measure of BE would be 52. And if this was an ACT question, then I promise you, you would see 10 and you would see 26 and you would see 52 and you would see something that you might have gotten from doing a slight error of some kind. Okay, so read the question and work it to the fullness. But what we're doing right here is applying congruent triangles. So knowing enough information to say that they're congruent and then using that with other pieces that we didn't know. So maybe you're just told a congruency statement. You don't know any of the pieces, but you know enough to have a congruency statement, and that's all that matters. And so you're told that angle A, or since we hadn't done it in a while, let's name it with 3 letters, just so that doesn't start to confuse us. So if angle BAC is equal to 4x plus 5, and angle CDE is equal to 3x plus 12. Okay, we ought to be able to look, knowing again that this is just angle A, and they're telling us that it's 4x plus 5. And this is just angle D, and they're telling us that it's 3x plus 12. Well, the congruency statement says that angle A is congruent to angle D. They've got to match. So we're allowed to set them equal to each other. So x equals 7. And it would maybe just ask for one or the other of them. Then we're not combining things together here with these angles. All right, so what we wanted to learn was how to solve for variables after identifying congruent parts of triangles. And so we did that, and all these 3 together should prepare us really well for questions about congruent triangles, especially if you encounter it on the ACT. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.